My 34F boyfriend's 32M parents' 70s want me to pay mortgage as a guest. I 34F have been dating my boyfriend, Mark 32M, for 3 years now. We met through mutual friends and quickly hit it off. He's smart, funny, kind, and we share many of the same values and goals. We live separately, but we've been talking about moving in together for a while now. We're at that stage in our relationship where the next steps are starting to become a real conversation, and up until recently, I was excited about it. Mark comes from a traditional family. His parents, who are both in their 70s, have been together for over 40 years. They live in a large house that they've owned for decades. It's one of those classic family homes that's probably seen generations grow up in it. I've been over there many times, especially during holidays and family gatherings, and I've always been treated politely, though somewhat distantly, by his parents. They're the type of people who don't wear their emotions on their sleeves and who can be a bit hard to read. A few weeks ago, Mark and I were having dinner at my place when the topic of moving in together came up again. We've been talking about it off and on for months, but we never really nailed down any details. We started discussing potential neighborhoods, our budget, and what kind of place we'd like. Then Mark mentioned something that caught me off guard. My parents were thinking, he started, a little hesitantly, that instead of us getting a new place, we could move into their house. I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. Move in with your parents? I asked, trying to process what he was saying. Yeah, he replied. They have that big house, and it's just the two of them now. They've got plenty of space, and it could help them out, you know, as they get older. Plus, we could save a lot of money. I didn't know what to say. On the one hand, it did make a kind of sense. The house was huge, with enough space that we could have our own area and not feel like we were intruding on their lives. And yes, we would save a lot of money, especially in today's housing market. But on the other hand, moving in with his parents felt like a huge step backward in terms of independence and starting our own life together. I don't know, Mark, I said carefully. I mean, I get where they're coming from, but don't you think it might be a little awkward? We're adults, shouldn't we have our own place? He nodded, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. I get that, but it's just an idea. We could at least think about it, right? We don't have to decide anything right now. I agreed to think about it, though I wasn't sure how I felt about the whole thing. I decided to put it out of my mind for the time being and see how things played out. Last week, Mark invited me over to his parents' house for dinner. It wasn't unusual. His mom likes to cook, and they often have family dinners. I went over after work, a bottle of wine in hand, and tried to keep an open mind about the whole situation. Dinner started off as usual. His mom had made roast chicken, and we chatted about the usual things: work, the weather, a TV show we'd all been watching. I was starting to relax when Mark's dad suddenly brought up the topic of us moving in. So, Mark tells us you'd have been talking about moving in together, he said, looking at me across the table. Yeah, we've been discussing it, I replied, glancing at Mark. Well, we were thinking, his mom chimed in, that it might make sense for you to move in here. We've got so much space, and it would be nice to have the company. I nodded, not really knowing what to say. It's definitely something we've been considering, I said cautiously. Then his dad dropped the bombshell. Of course, we'd expect you to contribute to the mortgage if you moved in. I blinked, taken aback. The mortgage, I repeated, trying to make sure I'd heard him right. Yes, his mom said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. With the way costs are rising, it only seems fair that if you're living here, you should contribute. We've still got a small mortgage left, and it would help us out. I was stunned. I didn't know how to respond. I glanced at Mark, hoping he would step in, but he just looked uncomfortable and said nothing. I felt my heart sink. Here I was, being asked to pay into their mortgage as a guest in their home. I wasn't even married to Mark, let alone part of the family in any official capacity. And now they were expecting me to help pay their mortgage. It felt completely inappropriate and, frankly, insulting. The rest of the dinner was awkward, to say the least. I tried to keep up polite conversation, but my mind was racing. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard, and I was disappointed that Mark hadn't spoken up. When we left, I didn't bring it up right away. I needed time to process what had just happened and figure out how I felt about it. But it was all I could think about on the drive home. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd missed something or if there was some kind of misunderstanding. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like his parents were trying to take advantage of me. I don't mind contributing to household expenses. If Mark and I were to move in together, I'd expect to share the costs of rent, utilities, groceries, etc. But this was different. This was me paying into a house that wasn't mine, with no real say in the matter. It felt wrong on so many levels. When we got back to my place, I finally brought it up. So, about what your parents said at dinner, I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. Mark looked at me, seeming a bit defensive. Yeah, what about it? Are you seriously considering having me pay their mortgage if we move in? I asked. He shrugged. I mean, it makes sense in a way. We'd be living there, using their space, and their utilities. It's not unreasonable for them to ask us to contribute. Us? I asked pointedly. Or me? He hesitated. Well, both of us, really. I felt a surge of frustration. Mark, this is their house. You're their son. If anyone should be helping them out financially, it's you. But I'm just your girlfriend. I'm not part of the family. Why should I be paying into their mortgage? He sighed. It's not just about the mortgage, though. It's about helping out. They're getting older, and they could use the support. I get that, I said, trying to stay calm. But there's a difference between helping out and being expected to subsidize their living expenses. If we move in, I'm basically becoming a tenant in their house, and I'm not okay with that. Mark didn't seem to get it. It wouldn't be like that. It's more of a partnership. We'd be living there as a family that I'm not officially a part of, I pointed out. And what about our independence? What about us having our own place, where we make the decisions and set the rules? He was quiet for a moment. I thought you liked my parents, he said finally. I do, I replied, exasperated. But that doesn't mean I want to live with them and pay their mortgage. This isn't just about liking them, Mark. It's about what kind of life we want to build together. As I lay awake that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the bigger implications of what had happened. Mark's parents' request felt like more than just a financial ask. It felt like a power play. It made me wonder about what kind of future we'd have if we did move in with them. Would they always expect to have a say in our lives? Would they continue to treat me like an outsider, someone who was expected to contribute financially, but not really part of the family? And what about Mark? If he couldn't stand up to his parents on this issue, what did that mean for our future together? I'd always known that Mark was close to his parents, but this situation had revealed a different side of him, one that was more willing to bend to their will than I was comfortable with. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the mortgage. It was about what kind of relationship I wanted with Mark, and what kind of life I wanted to build with him. I loved him, but I didn't want to be in a relationship where I was expected to give up my independence and essentially become a tenant in his parents' house. I wanted a partnership, not a situation where I was being asked to subsidize someone else's life. The next day, I knew I had to talk to Mark about everything. I couldn't just let this simmer under the surface. It was too important. I invited him over to my place again, and after some small talk, I took a deep breath and started the conversation. Mark, I've been thinking a lot about what happened last night, I began, trying to keep my tone steady. He looked at me warily. Okay, I don't think I'm comfortable with the idea of moving in with your parents, especially under those conditions. It feels like there are expectations that I'm not okay with, and it's making me rethink our plans. Mark frowned. What do you mean? We haven't even decided anything yet. Why are you rethinking things? Because it's not just about where we live, Mark, I said, struggling to find the right words. It's about what this means for our future. I feel like your parents' request was more than just a financial thing. It's like they're setting the tone for how our relationship would be if we moved in with them. And I'm worried that if I agree to this, I'll be giving up a lot more than just money. He seemed to be trying to understand, but I could see he was frustrated. But we'd be saving so much money, and they're not asking you to give up anything. They just want some help. It's not just about the money, I insisted. It's about independence, about us having our own life together. I don't want to move into their house and feel like I'm living by their rules, contributing to their mortgage, and losing sight of what we want as a couple. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. So what are you saying? You don't want to move in together at all? I want to move in together, I said firmly. But I want it to be in a place that's ours. Somewhere we both have equal say, where we can build our own life, without feeling like we're under someone else's thumb. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he nodded slowly. I get where you're coming from, he said, though he still sounded hesitant. But I'm worried about my parents too. They're getting older, and they've done so much for me. I feel like I owe it to them to help out. I understand that, I said gently. And I'm not saying we can't help them in other ways. But this just doesn't feel right to me. It's too much, too soon, and it's not the kind of life I want for us. There was a long silence as we both processed everything that had been said. I could see that Mark was torn, caught between his loyalty to his parents and his commitment to me. Finally, he spoke. Okay, he said quietly, I don't want to lose you over this. If you're not comfortable with it, then we won't do it. We'll look for our own place, somewhere that's just ours." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that." But, he added, "I'm going to have to explain this to my parents, and they're probably not going to be happy about it." "Are you okay with that?" I nodded. "I'm okay with that. I just want us to be on the same page." The next few days were tense. Mark had a difficult conversation with his parents, explaining that we wouldn't be moving in, and that we weren't comfortable with the idea of paying their mortgage. As expected, they weren't thrilled about it. They didn't understand why we wouldn't take advantage of such a great opportunity, and felt hurt that Mark wasn't willing to help them out in their time of need. His mom, in particular, seemed to take it personally, as though my refusal was a rejection of their family. Mark told me that she even hinted that I wasn't truly committed to the relationship if I wasn't willing to make this kind of sacrifice. It stung to hear that, but I knew I had to stand firm in my decision. Mark was supportive, though I could tell he was struggling with the tension between us and his parents. He reassured me that we were doing the right thing for our relationship, but it was clear that it wasn't easy for him. In the weeks that followed, Mark and I started looking for our own place. We toured apartments and small houses, discussing what we wanted and what compromises we were willing to make. It was exciting, but also stressful finding something that fit both our needs, and our budget was proving to be a challenge. Meanwhile, his relationship with his parents was strained. They were still polite to me when I saw them, but there was a noticeable chill in the air. I felt like an outsider more than ever, like I'd somehow failed a test I didn't even know I was taking. But despite the tension, Mark and I grew closer. We had more serious conversations about our future, about marriage, kids, where we wanted to live long term. We were both committed to making things work, and that commitment made the challenges we were facing seem more manageable. We eventually found a small apartment that we both loved. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that made all the difference. Moving in together was a big step, and while it didn't solve all our problems, it felt like we were finally starting our life together on our own terms. Looking back, I'm glad I stood my ground. It wasn't easy, and it put a lot of strain on our relationship, but it also forced Mark and me to really think about what we wanted and how we were going to achieve it. It was a wake-up call that made us stronger as a couple. As for his parents, things are still a bit frosty, but I'm hopeful that with time, they'll come to see that we made the right decision for us. We've made it clear that we're willing to help them out in other ways, but we need to do it in a way that feels fair and comfortable for both of us. In the end, this experience taught me a lot about boundaries, communication, and the importance of standing up for what you believe in even when it's hard. It wasn't the path I expected to take, but it was the one that led us to a better understanding of ourselves and each other.